Okay, well, it's 7 o'clock, so I'm going to get started. Good evening and welcome to Broadview's National Online Reading Club. My name is Jocelyn Bell and I'm the editor and publisher of Broadview. Working behind the scenes to help me out tonight is Sharon Doran, Broadview's promotion manager. She's in pink. We're so glad you've taken an hour to share your evening and be here with us. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, the original owners and custodians of this land. Today, Toronto is home to many, including a diverse urban Indigenous community of Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. We'd love to know where you're from too. Please say hello from your hometown in the chat space. If you're part of a faith community and want to add that as well, please do so. And if you want to add your own land acknowledgement from wherever you are, I invite you to share that as well. It's great for us to all get to know each other a bit better. Before we get started, I want you to know that we are recording this session so we can share this event with others. If you feel uncomfortable with your thumbnail video appearing on this recording, please turn off your video now. Also, please mute your audio or we may mute it for you. But do turn on the chat function. And if you don't know how, just hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen and the chat button will appear and just click on that. This evening, we're going to hear from Theo Robinson, James Loney, and Alana Mitchell, writers and story subjects from the June issue of Broadview. After our speakers have told us a bit about themselves and their stories, there will be a time to ask questions. Sharon will post our instructions on how to ask questions in the chat space. So let's get started. Theo Robinson is one of the first openly trans Anglican priests in Canada and is currently serving 7 different parishes in the Diocese of Rupert's Land in the Manitoba and Northwestern Ontario Synod of the Lutheran Church of Canada. He lives in Winnipeg with his partner, their 2 children, and 4 cats. Many of our readers noted Theo's green Converse running shoes in the photo, which matched his green stole. And I've since learned that Theo has different colored Converse running shoes for the entire liturgical calendar. In our June issue, Theo worked alongside journalist Isaac Werman to share his personal story of deciding to transition while studying at the University of Winnipeg to become an Anglican priest. In his role as clergy today, he's been able to counsel others who are questioning whether they really can be gay or trans and Christian. Please join me in welcoming Theo Robinson.
Yay! Virtual applause.
Thank you very much for that introduction. You'll have to bear with me. I've never done anything like this, so I'm a little bit nervous, but hopefully it'll go away as I go along here. But yes, I do in fact have liturgical correct Converse shoes. I've become known as the priest in jeans and Converse, so I just keep that up. And so I wore green to make sure it was accurate for the month of June. In case you didn't read it, the article, yes, is in fact a story of my life, I guess, and a very abbreviated one, which I'll touch base in just a moment or two. Being brought up in the Roman Catholic Church, I didn't really feel welcomed as I figured out who I was as life went on. Left the church for a good number of years through my teenage years and found my way back to the Anglican Church a little bit by accident and found my way into the diaconate and the priesthood, and the rest, as they say, is history. Eventually I did become one of the first, if not the first, transgender priest in Canada. We are still looking to see if that's true, but for sure in the Diocese of Rupert's Land in Manitoba and in Northwestern Ontario, I am the only, at least openly out transgender priest. The reason I worked with Broadview was because my professor, Jim Christie, is a big advocate for the Observer and now the Broadview magazine. And he got an email saying they were looking for some new writers that perhaps weren't from the United Church. And he sent them my name, and I sent in a couple of stories, and it turned out to be put together with an interview with Isaac. And to my surprise, ended up being the cover story for the June magazine. So that was also a little bit by accident. I have found over my life a lot of things happen by accident. But, it's always good to have those little happy little accidents, as Bob Ross like to say. Seeing myself on the cover of Broadview magazine, I will have to say, is a little odd. It was never something I would have expected. And I happen to work at Chapters early mornings, and so I get to see myself on the shelf every day for a while now. So it's a little odd. I've had a lot of people come up to me and go, "Oh, I know you, I work with you," or I'm surprised to know how many people that I know that have a subscription to Broadview as well. So I'm getting messages from all over the place congratulating me on the interview and having been happy to hear my story. So far, only positives have made their way to me, so I'm a little happy about that. I was kind of nervous about any negative reaction, but anybody that is in my life has said if I hear anything negative, I'm supposed to send them their way, and they'll protect me from there. Including the chairperson of my council on the Lutheran side specifically said, if anybody has a problem with you, you just let me know and I'll have a conversation with them. Where was I? Sorry about that. Oh, and some other positive responses. Actually, in fact, Jocelyn was mentioning that I mentor some people that are perhaps questioning their place in the church, whether or not they're allowed to be part of the LGBT community and have Christian faith. But not only that, it has turned out that I have also been helping some parents out in that matter, where their children are coming out, whether it be as lesbian, gay, or transgender, non-binary, anything along those gender lines. And they read my article, the parents read my article, and it helped them to kind of reconcile the relationship between being transgender and having faith in God and in Christianity. So that's been kind of a surprising side note to the effect. And in fact, that's kind of what I was hoping for by having the story being put out there, my life put out there. So that's good. And I've been told that there's maybe a little bit of a gap between my discovery of being lesbian and my discovery of being transgender male. There was only so much room in the story. I do hope to eventually put it all together, but we decided to concentrate on the transition into finding out that I'm transgender and Christian. But I can say that the years where I thought I was a woman and lesbian were very awkward, and so I don't tend to talk about them very much. I forced myself to be as feminine as I could possibly be. I wore dresses and makeup, and I was very awkward. It was awful. To look back on pictures now, it's like, what was I thinking? But you're trying to fit into society in the best way possible. And so those years I do tend to maybe skip over a little bit. So I'm open to questions about them, but sometimes my brain just goes from one to the next right away. But it was a long, probably a decade-long process at least, of trying to go from one to the other and figure out where I fit in society, let alone in a church. And as I mentioned before, I found the Anglican Church by accident. The person that I met, Helen Kennedy is her name. She wasn't named in the article, but I met her through a friend of a friend of a friend, and she happened to be a female Anglican priest. So I was thrown by the fact of not only was she a woman, but also a priest, and I, followed her to her church as, not so, this wasn't so strange like that. But I did ask if I could come in and visit her church and see her services. And we talked a lot over several years, and it wasn't an overnight thing where I went from not religious to I'm going to be a priest, even though it might seem like it on paper. But over several years, we had conversations about whether or not I was allowed to be a part of a church, whether or not I could take communion, whether or not I would be welcomed by her church family. And I can certainly tell you, almost from day one, I was welcomed in, my family was welcomed in, and I never looked back. And I have to actually remind myself sometimes that it's not that easy for everybody else. And so I purposely put myself into support groups on Facebook and other social media areas so that I can see the negative, so that I can remind myself of that and learn kind of how people might be looking for support and how to help them out as they work their way through knowing that they have faith and that they have belief in Jesus and in God, but their family and their church telling them that that's not allowed and that they are going to go to hell, or that they'll get kicked out of the church if they continue on this path. So it's been odd being out so much into the open so quickly, but it's been really good to do so, and I don't regret a minute of it. And having conversations with Isaac was a lot of fun, and he's a great guy to talk to, and it was nice to talk about some of the things that I really haven't spoken about at all, or in a long time, or at least in that depth. So it was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Theo. That's a really great reflection and capturing the process of making the story and just some of the thoughts that you've had since, and especially the responses, which I always wonder about because we don't always hear them like you would. I'm wondering, you've talked a bit about this, but I'm wondering if you could just tell us a bit more when families come to you or individuals come to you who are, coming out as gay or lesbian or trans. We all know the negative parts of the clobber verses in the Bible, as they're often called, that are used against LGBTQ people. But what do you say to them? How do you approach that conversation?
Well, delicately, first of all. But I do remind them that while the clobber passages, as you say, is used most often to prove why they shouldn't be part of the church, there is so many other parts in the Bible that say they should. And especially in Christianity, when we go into the story of Jesus and how he tells us of all the love that God has for us as people, it helps a little bit to negate maybe some of those previous passages, especially as he voices how God is bringing change to that, and Jesus is turning the tables in what was in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and in Genesis, and changing it to a more global love, and that God accepts us as we are, no matter who we are, no matter who we love. And my most important thing that I ever say to people is that God never makes mistakes. God created us as we are for a purpose. We need to work out what that purpose is and what that means for us in our lives.
Thank you. We have a question from Ray LeBeau, and Ray asks if you are currently ministering at an affirming church.
Affirming is a tough word. I'm going to say yes. Yes, I am, or I wouldn't be employed there. We are struggling with the term of affirming because there's a difference between affirming and accepting. And I know that the people of my parishes accept me as I am, or as I say, I wouldn't be there. And they certainly come to me for pastoral care, and they don't turn me away or act in any way that they should in towards me. As a church as a whole, though, we still have some work on what that affirming word means and how accepting we are. But I can say that in particular, my parishes are definitely accepting and affirming. And I work hard with my bishops to make sure that wherever I go is going to be affirming, or it won't work. That partnership just would never work if they weren't affirming.
Can you tell us a little bit more about where the Anglican and the Lutheran churches are in their journey towards, well, what we hope is their journey toward greater inclusivity, and what those of us who are allies, or those of us who are from different denominations, could do to help forward that a bit?
We are definitely not as far along as the United Churches, definitely. We are a good 10 to 15 years behind, I think, where the United Church is currently, if I understand correctly. The Anglican Church is still working on same-gender marriages, and in fact, that motion failed after 3 readings at our synod. So that was a pretty big blow to the community and has put us back a good decade, I think, in work that we have to do. But there's different levels. There's enough room in there that we can still move forward. It's not stopped, but we have to figure out why it got turned down. And there's mixed messages about at what level it failed at vote. Like, we know where it did. We know it failed at Bishop's House, but we don't know why and what we can do to change that at the moment. But we are working with various groups at the national level of the church to do that. The Lutheran Church, I did read a little bit on where they're at. They are a little bit behind the Anglican Church. They haven't passed the same kind of motions as the Anglican Church has, but they're fairly equal in partnership and belief. Like, we have relationships to be able to share ministries. So I would say that we're on par there, but we still have a lot of work to do. There's a surprising number of parishes that are still unaccepting of the LGBT community. So how other denominations can help is just with the visibility of the affirmation. We do lean on some of the work that the United Church has already done in order to show that nothing changed. Like, it's not like all of a sudden the world blew up around the United Church when they said we're going to accept same-gender marriages and be affirming and accepting. So I think the more visible that is, the easier it is to show the Lutheran and Anglican churches that it won't be of any harm to our belief system to be affirming and accepting.
So, the United Church, as somebody has commented here, still has work to do, certainly. But why, I wonder if you've ever thought about becoming clergy in the United Church, where things might be a little easier for you. Is that a consideration?
It was briefly for a little bit, mostly because a lot of my education took place at the University of Winnipeg, which was United Church based. So I got exposed to a lot of United Church ministers and that kind of thing, but I don't know if jumping ship would have been the right thing to do. Even if it would have been easier, there is enough of the Anglican Church that is accepting at all levels, and I am proud to be part of the movement that is helping that go forward and lead the Anglican Church into being more open and more affirming. And the more visible that I can be, the better for it, I think.
Okay. There's an interesting question here from Anton Loving, who says, I totally believe that God is immanent in all forms of creation. Our religion is totally influenced by its cultural context, but we are embodied, in which most people identify as male and female. As a trans person, knowing both identities, is it easier for you or difficult to serve as male now? Why or why not?
Is it easier to serve as what?
As male.
Is it easier to serve as male? Well, that's an interesting question. There is a lot of different questions in that question. Yes, religion is definitely culturally based. Just to acknowledge that, because if you look at the Anglican Church worldwide, this wouldn't even be a conversation. In Africa, I wouldn't even be allowed to live. So definitely religion is culturally based. I truly believe we are all made in the image of God, who is non-gender specific. So I am trying to lean away from the binary God and reference in that way. Is it easier to do so as male? There's definitely a lot of life that is easier to do as male, which is unfortunate to say. I have noticed that secularly, for sure, I get treated differently as male than I did as female. And it's possible that my voice could have more weight religiously as male. And I don't like to think of it that way, but when I watch my female counterparts as clergy struggle to even find work and to find a voice, then yes, I would say it's possible that it is easier to do as male. And it's a sad state to say that would be the case, because it really isn't right that it should be that way.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your honesty. This will probably be the last question, and then we'll move on, but we timed this story to coincide with Pride Month being June. And I just wondered how you celebrate Pride and what it means to you.
Well, the way I've celebrated Pride over the last few years has changed every year. The first time I celebrated Pride, I did so out in the closet and hid in a corner and watched the speeches and didn't march or anything like that. As time went on, as I became more proud of who I was, I definitely marched more publicly. I go back and forth whether or not I'm with a secular group or with the church. One year I marched with the curling club of Winnipeg. So, but I'll admit the last couple of years I've been in Toronto. It just so happened that I had a conference in Toronto on the week we had Pride last year, so I didn't go. But yeah, usually I find a group to march with and a bunch of friends that we'll go with, and we're all quite sad that this year that won't happen. Ours has been moved to September, so our Pride Month is still right now, but our activities won't be till September, and likely it'll be online. So we just try to get to as many of the different events that we have on, and try to have fun. And it's the one time of year that everybody gets to be who they want to be that week, and you don't have to hide it. You can just be who you are and dress how you want. And yeah, it's a fun time. It's a couple of years since I've actually been to any of our Pride stuff, unfortunately.
Yep. Well, I hope you have some rainbow Converse shoes to wear for this month.
I don't. My daughter does, but I don't.
Thank you so much, Theo. It's just been a pleasure to hear from you. And if you would like to stick around after, I'm sure people would love to chat with you a bit more. But for the time being, we're going to move along, and I would love to introduce you to James Loney. James is a counselor at the Anishinaabe Health in Toronto. In 2005, he was kidnapped by Iraqi surgeons while leading a Christian peacemaker team's delegation. His book, called Captivity: 118 Days in Iraq and the Struggle for a World Without War, details his harrowing experience while also pleading for peace. In our June issue, James pens a letter to Sasha Bond, who was a Canadian inmate who died in a Florida prison. Sasha Bond was ignored by the Canadian government despite his mother's efforts to bring him back to Canadian soil. Please join me in welcoming James Loney.
Thank you, Jocelyn, and also for so many people who joined us this evening. Good evening or good afternoon, whichever time zone you're in. And like Theo, I also am nervous because I haven't done anything like this before. And yeah, so where to start? I guess in November of 2009, I wrote an article that was published in this magazine that talked about how in the Harper, especially in the Harper years, there was a real discrepancy in how if you were a Canadian in trouble abroad, there was a real discrepancy in how whether or not you would be helped based on your identity. And I, as Jocelyn mentioned, had been kidnapped in 2005 as a part of a peacemaker team delegation and peace work in Iraq. And the Canadian government mobilized the team and opened a command center, and there was liaisons from my family, and enormous resources were put into finding us, and we were found, and a military operation secured 3 of us. Of the 4, one man, Tom, an American man, was killed 2 weeks before our release. So it pained me that people like Maher Arar, Omar Khadr, Abu Sufyan Abdulrazik were left, many years without assistance. And so I wrote about this, and I mentioned there was a young man that I just happened to Google, Sasha Bond, who was 19 in 2004, and was down visiting his stepfather in Florida, and he had just been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and wasn't taking his meds, and he got really drunk, and he went to a bar, and then there was a kind of an altercation, and he was charged with 4 counts of attempted murder. He did have a gun. No one was hurt. I think the gun was empty, and then he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. And so he was appealing to come to Canada and to finish his sentence, which anyone who is abroad in prison can apply to do. And the Harper government, refused to consider that. There were a number of applications, and so I happened to mention his name in this article. And I don't know when, but it was a year later or so, something like that, that I got a letter from Sasha Bond from his prison in Florida, and it was a very nice letter. And he, he asked, just kind of told me a bit about his situation, and asked if there was any way I could help. And I said, well, maybe. And so I went to visit his mother, who lived in Ottawa at the time, and kind of started to do some organizing and some work to try to bring attention to his situation. And then what happened was, when I came back from Iraq, and after this book that Jocelyn mentioned that I wrote, I kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but my life purpose faculty went off, and I was kind of in a way like, not exactly, but kind of like a walking shell. Like there was, it would look like everything was fine from the outside, it was working, but on the inside, I couldn't make any decisions. Like I really, I remember looking at my calendar, and there wasn't a single thing that, is my time already at 5 minutes? Yes, it is. Okay.
You're okay. Actually, you have. I'll give you 2 more minutes. How about that?
Okay. Oh my God. Okay. So yeah. So I just was kind of lost, and what happened was that my desire to do activism kind of died, and it just puzzled me, and so I kind of stopped communicating with Diane and Sasha, and so out of the blue, Sasha wrote to me again last June, and it sat on my desk here, and I thought right away I should answer. This is such a nice letter, and I should answer Sasha right away, but I felt guilty, and so I just kind of procrastinated, as I do with things. And so I got to it. It was Boxing Day, and I sat down and I started writing to him. And as I was writing, I thought I should just Google Sasha just to see like what's happened. And that's when I learned that he had died in August, very, very tragically, in horrible, horrible circumstances, completely needlessly. And so I decided, I just thought, well, I need to somehow honor Sasha, and I think I needed also to speak a little bit about what I was feeling, the many complex feelings I was having in relation to that. So, and then I'll just say briefly, it was my next door neighbor, her name is Sarah Shepard, who's a very dear friend of mine, and she suggested that I originally had submitted to the Globe Mail, and they weren't interested. And she said, why not Broadview? And I said, okay. And I'll finish there.
Well, that's a Globe and Mail's loss, I say. So thank you. I'm glad that you came to us after that. Do you have any insights about why there is seemingly such a lack of political will to bring prisoners like Sasha to Canada when there's so much action galvanized around your case? How do you think they pick and choose?
Well, I think it's very clear. It's your social location. It's who you are, the color of your skin, your religion, your country you're born in. Some people matter more than others, and that's as blunt as it is, I think. And there, in our case, there was a lot of publicity and interest behind, and for some people, no one knows who they are, and they are the ones who are in most need of protection.
Yeah. What legislation needs to change so that everybody who's incarcerated abroad or taken hostage, in your case, quite different situation really, receives equal treatment?
Well, I think I know I'm not an expert on this thing. I would just have an opinion, but I think a kind of like a Canadians in Trouble Abroad Bill of Rights, which would establish, a basic framework for any, because any of us who are travelers could run into trouble. And so it establishes a minimum kind of policy and framework for, how the government will respond. And so that it's not just left to the arbitrary discretion of the consular officials and the politicians, and whichever government is in power.
Do you think it matters which, sort of to the next question here from Mary Leslie, does it matter which government is in power? Have the Liberals been more amenable than the Conservative government?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I know that the Martin government had appointed Dan McTeague as a special counselor to deal specifically with Canadians in Trouble Abroad, and he was very passionate about that. And he was an MP, I think, from Oakville, and and then that whole structure was dismantled with the Harper government, and then there was the door was slammed. And then I think with the Trudeau government, I am not sure about this. I think there have been more. They've kind of opened up the file to allow Canadians to complete their sentences here, but it's not where it should be. There was a Toronto Star article done by I forget her name, a really great journalist who kind of looked at this in depth about 3 years ago, this policy.
Okay. Mary Margaret Boone asks if you have any idea of the number of Canadians who are incarcerated outside of Canada.
I don't know. Yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah. You spent a lot of time with Sasha's mom, Diane. You've talked to her a few times. How does she remember her son? Because what we've got in the story is mainly, his worst moment followed by more terrible moments for him. But how does she remember her son?
Well, she remembers him as loving and as a really good boy, and as she describes him as having a good heart. And she told me that she had kept every Christmas present, since his incarceration, had saved for him so that they could open together when he was finally released and they could celebrate. And she is a complete lion. She is just the fiercest, mother bear. She really she did everything and more that she could do for Sasha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question here, and I wondered the same thing. I read your book, Captivity. It was completely engrossing. Felt like I was in your mind. It was an amazing book, and I recommend it to everyone. And it's also a hopeful book. It's a grim state of affairs, but it's also a hopeful book, and a very interesting to read how you understand peace and violence and so on. How are you doing since 2005? How is James Loney today?
Well, I'm good. I feel, you know, I still have this gnawing kind of struggle with, you know, what am I to do in the world? At age 56, I still feel that. But I feel very privileged to have this little quiet niche of sitting with people and listening to listening to their healing story, their life, their struggles, and accompanying and supporting healing work. It's a great joy. It's very meaningful. And I still have this gnawing thing that it's like, you know, there's the structural level too, and I haven't kind of integrated that well, but I slowly am working on it. This is part of this article is kind of working on that, but on the whole, I feel every day is really a gift, and it's good to be alive. Yeah.
The one thing, when I was reading your book, it was at, and I live in Toronto like you do, it was at the height of the lockdowns and the restrictions. And I couldn't help but think, like, not that being a hostage is anything like being under lockdown, but did any of that experience prepare you for the lockdown experience? Because we were, you know, we're stuck inside, we were stuck with the same people, we weren't chained to them, and we weren't under the threat of violence. So I've just wondered if any of that replayed in your mind, or is it just so completely different that it's not even a question?
There are like there are you know, resonances, I suppose, you know. I'm a single, so it was lonely for me, and especially at the beginning time when it was so uncertain, and is the world going to end, and what's happening, and it did kind of, the resonances in like how unexpected life can be and how it can change on you and on a dime, and you can't just get out of it. Like we were in something, we still are. We can't just snap our finger and get out. Like we have to go through this process. And so those are, you know, some similarities. There is a kind of a barrenness, you know, especially at the beginning, I felt that had resonances in the barrenness of the captivity. It was harsh.
Yeah. We'll have just one more question. There's Gloria Marshall is asking, we know that you are working to help others at this time, but tell us a little bit more about your current work.
So I'm a social worker, and I work at Anishinaabe Health, which is an Indigenous community health center that integrates traditional with Western kind of modes of healing, and so I work with the people that come to Anishinaabe Health for counseling and therapy, and I'm very interested in trauma and and how the body has a memory, and kind of working with that to kind of help the body to let go of that tension, that survival energy that holds us back from living, you know, in the present moment fully. And there's a kind of a direct line between where I am and the kidnapping, but that's another story.
Okay, thank you so much, James. It's a big honor to have you with us tonight, and I hope you'll stick around for a little bit afterwards too. Next, we're going to hear from Alana Mitchell. Alana Mitchell is a journalist, author, and playwright based in Toronto. In 2014, she turned her second book, Seasick, The Global Ocean in Crisis, into a one-woman play, which before the pandemic, she had been performing around the world. This is Alana's second appearance at a Broadview online reading club. In our June issue, Alana wrote about the community of Gibsons, BC, famous for being the setting of the Beachcombers TV show, and also how Gibsons has become an international leader on nature-based solutions to the climate crisis. Please welcome Alana Mitchell.
Hi everybody. Thanks, Jocelyn. Thanks for being here, everybody. Can you hear me? Am I on? You'll let me know. There's a whole bunch of traffic noise in front of my house, so you'll let me know if this is, you know, impeding everything. But so this is a story. Actually, I think, Jocelyn, this was your idea. You said to me, you know, is there anything you'd like to write about? And you mentioned that there had been a whole bunch of discussion in the office about planting 2 billion trees and what did that mean. And I said, you know, there's a really interesting story here, because it's not just about planting trees. It's about how do we harness the power of the earth to help the earth heal from all the assaults that humans have put on it. And this is really, we're really talking about carbon here primarily. So I started looking at it, and it turns out that there's this whole philosophy that I find incredibly compelling, because it ties together a whole bunch of ideas that have been out there, and they've been floating around, and they've been really, really difficult to hang your hat on. And really what it comes down to is, you know, let's just let nature do her thing and not stand in her way, and not, you know, destroy her in the ways that we've been doing. And the idea that this has the power to draw down carbon from the atmosphere, to, you know, to help us deal with all these issues that are so dangerous for humanity and for other species was really compelling to me. And so I started to look at what Canadian stories we could tell about that. And it turned out that one of the leaders in this whole field was the place that was my second childhood home, and it's a place called Gibsons. I knew it as Gibsons Landing, and it was where my grandmother lived when I was when I was growing up, and we used to go out there every summer. And it's right on the coast. It's just up the coast from Vancouver, but you have to get there by ferry. And I just have all of these memories of being in Gibsons every summer. And so when I realized that this little place is now a leader in this thing called nature-based solutions, and that they had developed this whole thing called the Gibsons method of economic analysis of how nature can provide services that are worth money to a municipality, which is sort of a dry way of saying, let's just let nature do her thing. I was just really fascinated by that. And so I ended up telling the story through my own childhood experiences. And the thing that was the most interesting to me of all of it was that it made me go back to Gibsons in a way, in an emotional, memory way, that I had forgotten Gibsons. I had forgotten what it was like to be there. I'd forgotten all these childhood experiences there. That I had forgotten what it was like to be there. And so as I tracked my own experience through this, through the story, I realized that I had, just as Gibsons has undergone a whole transformation in this move from, the industrial activity of fishing and logging and mining and all that kind of stuff, to now being this leader in nature-based solutions. I realized that I had gone there as a child not understanding anything about how the ocean worked, not understanding anything about how, nature works, not understanding any of this stuff, and that I too had undergone a transformation. So I was able to weave that through the story, and it was really moving for me to do it. And then the best part of all was that I got a note after the story came out. I got a note from somebody who said, "Which house was it that your grandmother lived on Franklin Road?" And I sent her back a note, and it turns out that she lives just a few doors down from where my grandmother lived. And she said, oh, well, that's the house. And she listed the people who live there. And there's a ferry worker who lives there and a nurse, and they've got a dog and a kid. And so there was this whole picture of a future life for the house that I had known so well when I was, it's a cottage really, but it was just fascinating to plug into that. So maybe I'll leave it there. How about that?
Great. Thank you. And like so many of your stories, there's always so many different stories woven in together, and you do that so masterfully. And I had to laugh when you started off saying that it was my idea, and all I did is really say, Elena, what do you want to write about? And so that's usually my best idea.
The best editor.
And saying, what do you want to write about? So one of the questions in your in your story, what you wrote is that the nature-based solution movement addresses something that has long been missing in the anguished climate discourse, the yearning to do something tangible to restore nature's balance. This is the abatement of grief.
Right.
Wow, what a statement. Can you tell us a bit more about that part of it?
Well, people are looking at so much of the climate discussion has been very, very, very technical and very, I think it's quite cerebral, and it's really hard to see how an individual can plug into it. What is it that I can see, not just do, but how can I see change here? And so one of the things that's so fascinating about this nature-based solutions movement is that you can actually go to some of these places where, I was thinking of the wetlands on the prairies. I don't think I wrote about those in the end, but there are all these potholes in the prairies, which are little wet spots in the prairies that are part of the solution. The idea is to just let them stay there, and they absorb carbon. And they, not only that, because they absorb carbon because they grow plants, but they support all these ecosystems for birds and insects, and they cool off the prairies in ways that people hadn't even understood. So there are all these, and you can go to them, and they're there, and you can understand, like you can make a connection between what that landscape evolved to do and what is and how we changed it and why that matters. And I find that really fascinating.
Great. We have a question from Michael. Michael's going to ask his own question. So go ahead, Michael.
Hi, thanks so much for the story, Alana. It's really great. I'm sort of curious, given that ideas of ecosystem services and natural capital and things in various forms have been around really for many decades and haven't been integrated as broadly in such a systemic way as it has been here, why Gibson's? What makes it so special? Why do you think they're an early adopter of that? And what can that tell us about encouraging wider adoption of it in other places?
Oh, that's a great question, Michael. It all came down to money. So Gibson's it's a rural community. It doesn't have a tremendous amount of money, and so it needed to do something about water filtration. And they looked at the cost of building another way of handling the water, of filtering the water, and it turned out it was going to be really expensive. And they said, well, wait a sec, we already have this aquifer underneath Gibson's. What if we could make sure that it could continue to do its job? What would that cost us? And so they just started thinking about it in financial terms, and they got an analysis by this wonderful ecological economist who is based with the David Suzuki Foundation in Vancouver. And she and her team came up and they looked at what was there in the aquifer and realized that it would cost a quarter of the cost to just make sure the aquifer just kept doing its job. Just upkeep on the aquifer would do what they needed to do, and it would do it better. It would actually protect, this is the interesting thing to me, was that it would actually protect Gibson's better against future flooding because it could hold more than any kind of cement piping could hold. And so they just came to it strictly through a financial system. But you're right, all of these ideas have been around for ages and ages and ages. It's just sort of the thing that Gibson's did that was so interesting was to actually put it on the balance sheet. So they include the services on their balance sheet and say that they have to keep up the aquifer and its ability to absorb water the same way they have to make sure that the roads and the sewage system are kept up. So it's just a philosophical shift. Yeah.
I've got a question that was sent to me directly. This is from somebody who's been reading you in Broadview and has read Seasick and Malignant Metaphor. And so big fan. And they're wondering about your writing process. Do you completely immerse yourself into one project at a time, or do you always have lots of things on the go? How do you do it, Elena? How do you keep up?
Thank you for asking that question and for realizing that it's it is a process. But I actually, in my dreams, I only have one project at a time. I mean, today, for example, I was working on a huge piece about caribou, and then I was working on a huge piece about women in botany in the 17th century, and then I got into a whole other topic that has to do with quantum physics. And so the idea, the actual thing is that I'm juggling a lot of files in my head at the same time. In my perfect world, I would only work on one thing at a time, but my schedule just doesn't quite work that way. So I'm always setting up interviews, and it's kind of challenging because I have to remember, from the interviews, or listen to the tapes again and make sure that I've got everything down that I need to get down from those, because it's hard to remember. Some of the interviews for the piece in Broadview, for example, I did at the end of last year, and then wrote the piece much later. So you have to piece it all together again in your head. But the good part about that for me is that it seems to sort of gestate, as I let it rest and I think about it, it's somehow, some of the connective tissue seems to form itself in my head. The things that I need to write it to make it work for me, because it has to work for me as a story, or I can't send it to you. So.
We've got a question from Carolyn Fraser, and she says, restorative agriculture is at the forefront in Ontario.
Yeah.
Other places, have you thought about investigating that area?
It's a great question, and actually restorative agriculture is part of this thing called nature-based solutions. So it's actually quite a big component of it, and really it's just this sort of pivot, this philosophical pivot, trying to think of how else we can think about how we treat the land. But it would make a great hey, here's a pitch for you, Jocelyn. We could have a story on restorative agriculture. Hey.
We're done. We're good. I'll give you a deadline later. Peter Stiggins asks, what writers inspire you?
There are so many. I'm just, this pandemic has done something interesting for me. I haven't been able to read much fiction, which is new for me. Usually I read masses and masses and masses of fiction. And instead, I've just been immersed in essays, and so nonfiction essays. And so I have been, there's just been this huge range of they're almost always young women. So far, many of them have been from different cultures from me, and I've just had a whole string of them. So I'm reluctant to name any specifically, but if you send me a note, I'll send you a list.
Your early days visiting your grandmother in Gibson's, that really kind of sparked your interest in science, I think. Can you talk a little bit about those early influences?
Well, I think it was partly the journey across the prairies. We lived in Regina, and we drove, out to the coast and took the ferry up to my grandmother's place. And so I think it was partly just the journey of traveling across this huge, big country and understanding its vastness. Partly was that. And my dad was a biologist, and so he would explain things as we went. But I think the thing about Gibson's that was so intoxicating was that, we were just, my grandmother's house was right across the street from the beach. And so my parents would just let us go down to the beach. And so it was this completely untethered, unsupervised exploration of quite a dangerous beach. And there was something about that freedom that just, I don't know, it just got into my blood. I can't really describe it any other way.
Yeah.
It just needed to understand it in a way. And because I wasn't supervised, I kind of let my imagination go, as one does.
That's when kids learn best, I think, when they're unsupervised. I just have to ask this, did you watch The Beach? Were you a Beachcombers fan, and which was your favorite character? Because I was personally very terrified of Relic, but I was
Relic was horrifying. No, because we were there, and because the Beachcombers was such a huge part of Gibson's, we religiously watched. I mean, it was a ritual. And no, Jerusi, of course, it was Jerusi. And you would go, at that time when I was a kid, we'd go to Gibson's, and they'd point up to the hill and say, "Oh, that's the great Jerusi's house," and it was this kind of, there was quite a bit of hero worship, I have to say.
Well, I'm going to leave it there, and I hope you'll stick around for a few minutes too. And so that brings us to the end of our official program. So I just want to thank all three of you again for being here tonight, and everyone else as well. You know, there are three presenters volunteered their time, and we're so very grateful to all three of you. Tomorrow we'll be sending you a short survey by email so you can share your thoughts about this event. And Broadview's Online Reading Club is a free event, and the costs to produce it are minimal. However, if you would like to help Broadview continue to feature exceptional people like Theo Robinson and James Loney, and writers like Alana Mitchell, please consider donating to the Friends Fund. And Sharon will post a link in the chat space, and we'll also include a donations link with tomorrow's survey. Broadview reading clubs exist across Canada. If you're interested in joining a local club or starting one of your own, please check out our information pages at broadview.org/reading clubs. If your club isn't already listed here, please let us know so we can spread the word. And otherwise, thank you again for being here. Be well, and I hope to see you back here for our next online reading club on July 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern, when we'll discuss the July-August issue. So good night. I'm going to stay, but if you want to get going, good night. If you want to stay, then we'll just have an informal chat. So take care.
I sent you a note about having read Broadview earlier and being so impressed with it, and calling my minister and saying, Dawn, have you read this magazine? It's so good. And then him saying, that's my daughter who's the editor.
Ah, okay.
Boy, was he ever proud.
That's nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah.
Saying so. Yeah, my both of my parents are ministers, or retired, I should say, ministers now.
Yes.
And, so I often have the pleasure of hearing from people from, well, their whole lifetime, their whole careers in ministry. I get nice notes from. So that's
just previous to that, your brother had come to our service and had played his violin, and we were very impressed. So I had to say, well, you just have very impressive children.
And there's two more siblings in the family, and they're equally impressive. But yeah, my brother's a violinist. 4 of us all together. Yeah.
And I love the magazine, of course.
Oh, thank you for saying so, Marjorie. It's nice.
Yeah.
Nice to hear.
Hi there, Jocelyn. Thank you. Yeah, I have to say the same thing. It is quite different from the Observer, and I really like the format very much. Yeah. And,
yeah. Well, I worked on both, and it's good.
I just want to say that I subscribed to the magazine as a favor to my friend who was collecting them for church. You know, and the more people you got, I guess there was a deal on the magazine.
Yeah.
But I've really enjoyed it, and while I didn't want to get any more magazines, well, I don't have any more except that, I found it really useful to have the book club because it just focused me on 3 articles, and you know, I got a lot more out of it in that way. So I'm really grateful for that, and I've really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, we're enjoying doing it, and I think like we're starting to see the end of, well, we hope the pandemic, or at least everyone's going to be vaccinated. But I think this format is, you know, everyone's here. We all like it. I think we'll just keep going. It was initially started because of COVID-19 and just our desire to start something that would help us form community. But I think we'd like to keep it going.
Yeah, I hope the church does too.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question of Jocelyn?
Yeah.
Well, I want to follow up on the other and say it's an excellent magazine. I'm sure you are, but I hope you're very, very proud. It's beautiful work to transition in the way you have it. I grew up in the United Church, and I have enjoyed reading the Observer off and on over the years. But I think you've done a brilliant job transitioning it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's well deserved. But what I wondered is, I've been trying to share articles on Facebook with friends that I think are not from the United Church, a lot of them. And I just wonder how it's going, or if there are other things you'd like to see supporters do to help broaden in that kind of, because I'm thinking of lots of people who are, very progressive, would be interested in all of the topics, definitely not rooted in the United Church, and but not necessarily turned off by things that are spiritual. So I'm just wondering, I guess, how it's going, and then if there are things that you think that we can do as readers that want to support the magazine in broadening its reach.
I might throw that one to Emma, our digital editor, who's here. Emma, if you don't mind jumping in, because I think that's a great question for you. And also, who's your baby? You have a beautiful baby.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Yeah, I mean, it's going well. We're continuing to try and reach out to folks who aren't in the United Church, and we try and in our story selection and in how we frame them as well, try to ensure that we get a wide reach and encourage folks from groups that might be interested in these stories to share them with their audiences as well. So yeah, we're always trying to figure out how to broaden our reach beyond the United Church, because as you said, there's a lot of folks, like progressive Canadians, who are interested in these types of stories. So yeah, if you always welcome ideas, if there are communities that you think would be interested in reading about them, reading our stories, or groups in particular, community groups are always great. But yeah, no, we're always trying to broaden our reach, and yeah, please continue to share them with your friends, and absolutely, yeah. If you have any ideas for, I'll put my email here if anyone has any ideas for yeah, ways we can reach out to more communities of people, or ideas for framing our stories. We're sort of the first connection point for people with Broadview. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, share the stories. That would be great. And
I'm actually surprised to see how many different groups that Broadview has popped up in that have nothing to do with the UCC.
Oh yeah, like where?
Parents groups that I'm in Winnipeg, a lot of, especially lately, stories that have just been dealing with what's going on in the world outside of kind of our world, and we see it. Well, I've been sharing it in the Anglican group in Winnipeg, and I'm not religious at all, and I've liked the new content that Broadview has started to post.
Mm-hmm. Great.
It's Mary, and I just wanted to ask a question. Was there not a plan at one point that it would be in magazines and as a magazine in stores? And I haven't seen it anywhere. And I keep asking stores that have big layouts, and they keep saying they haven't heard of it. So I just wondered what that plan is looking like.
It's at chapters.
Sorry, I was just going to answer that. So yeah, we went out on the newsstands, and it's the way newsstands work is you work with a company, a distributor, and they determine which stores you're going to be in based on their sales and based on the type of clients, based on, like, you kind of look at a sort of adjacent magazines, like similar types of magazines, and if they sold on this newsstand, then we'll try Broadview on that newsstand. It's a whole thing of how it works. So we don't determine which newsstands we're on. And with COVID, I mean, like, so many stores were closed that we really just, the number of copies across Canada at one point went down to 100 across Canada, which is pretty low. We're coming back up a little bit as stores reopen. But so that's the reason. So the individual retailer isn't the person who's going to know if, I mean, they could probably request it, but generally they just get the magazines they get based on what the distributor decides about which magazines show up there. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll keep looking.
I wish we could, and month to month it changes, right? So they adjust it all the time, and so we don't even know exactly which newsstands we're on. So.
Well, I love all the articles, and what was really fun about this Alana's article is that I lived on Bowen Island, which is about an 8.5-minute bus for a boat ride from Gibson's, and had never heard the story of Gibson's and how it had gone. But I am very aware of nature-based nature organizers and environmentalists who've been working in the whole bay around Gibson's, up Howe Sound. So it was fun to put that together. I mean, they've really transformed that whole area in terms of wildlife and what's entering what wildlife is actually safe and entering that area. So here I had to go to Broadview to find out about something that was very close to home.
The Toronto Magazine. Yeah, and I also read recently that Gibson's is working to, or maybe they've already done it, to incorporate the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into their municipal laws, I suppose, looking to recognize that. And that's only a few written municipalities have done that in Canada, and they're one of them. So they're very much on the forefront on lots of issues. So
thank you.
Yeah,
I love all the articles that you did today and all the speakers. So keep them coming. They're wonderful.
Thanks, Mary. We will. That's what we do.
What I found interesting was that both the James Loney article and the first article were very much about people becoming activists a little bit through finding the purpose. And I think what I'm going to do is send that James Loney article to my politicians.
Oh, good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would be useful to do so.
Yeah, it's a very good point. They both, well, is Theo still here? Yeah, you're still here. Curious to hear what you think were some of the commonalities that you had with James Loney's story or any of the others.
Honestly, I didn't. I haven't read the magazine yet, and I didn't stick around. So, but just from what I've heard, yeah, it's interesting to hear how a lot of the stories lately that I have seen are definitely people based, and I'm liking that. And I didn't really know the Observer before, so I don't really have a previous knowledge. But what you've been putting out, at least on Facebook, it's been good to see how people centered and activist centered it is.
And I'm sure the Unitarian Church people would also be interested in this. They're a bunch of activists.
Yeah.
I share it as widely as I can.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Well, if there's any other thoughts that anybody wants to share, I just want to cut it off. But it's also a beautiful evening. Maybe you want to get outside for a few minutes before it's too late.
I like the way that you attacked articles with it kind of things that maybe are outside the circle of your usual way of thinking, but you seem to present it in a factual point of view. And then when you see these people in the book club, you can see them as people, and it seems to connect so much more to make the articles seem even more real. So I really appreciate seeing it over the time. I've been here a few times, and this evening has not been disappointing at all. Just continues to add to the knowledge that we're getting that needs to be done, and it's in a peaceful way. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a nice companion to have the print version, the journalistic version, and then just to have a conversation with a human being. I agree. Alan looks like he's got his hand up. Alan, go ahead.
Oh, yes, I typed in a question just at 8 o'clock for James about with you working with Indigenous people at Anishinaabe Health, and perhaps he has clients there who've spent some time in jails or prisons or had conflicts with police. I just wondered if he found his experiences helpful as a social worker and empathizing with his clients, but he didn't get back to me.
Yeah, and I think I'm just skimming through the pages. I don't think he's here. I think he's gone for the evening. So yeah,
okay.
there's always a few questions that we can't get to in the time, and but we like to keep it going and get 3 people in the hour. So Margaret has her hand up too. Margaret Bryan.
better unmute myself. I asked a question, and I because I came in late, I had a phone call from a friend who's just lost her husband. And I'm just wondering, since you're being recorded, is it going to be possible to view this this reading club another time?
Yeah, we posted on our website. If you go under About Us and then under Reading Clubs and then National Online Reading Clubs, I think is the path. Maybe Sharon post it. But that's where we, in it, in the next couple of days, we'll post the recording to that space so that anybody who missed it can watch it. So.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And then Betty has a question for Theo. Theo, can you read that? Do you want to just answer?
Yeah, she's asking if I've been able to connect with other ministers who are transgender. A few. I have found a group of us that are working nationally to work on some liturgy, but none of them are deacons or priests yet. So I would love to be able to connect with more clergy that are transgender, but the only one that I know of is in San Francisco, and I won't ever get a chance to meet them, but it would be nice. And so I'm hoping one day I'll be able to meet some more people. The one thing with being transgender is if you are living stealth, which means you hide who you were, I may never know. I could meet people, and unless they choose to tell me that they're transgender, I may never know. So it's an interesting conundrum.
I appreciated your comments. I'm United Church based, and I appreciated your comments in your presentation about the United Church of Canada and the work it's been doing in the forefront of all of this, and certainly have had the opportunity to work beside, I'm a layperson, but be aware of and meet several transgendered ministers. And yeah, the spectrum is broad, but also aware that it would be a support system, I'm sure, that is quietly out there.
It would be. And when I first started coming out, that was one of the first questions I had was, is there anybody out there that I could lean on? So far, still waiting. I do have a couple of people, but like I said, they're not ordained. That's okay too.
I don't see a way to raise my hand again. Can I make a comment? It's Margaret Bryan.
Yeah, go ahead. Please do.
I'm wondering, I understand you mentioned because Theo is with the Anglican Church. I wonder if you've got to know Ruth Wood, Theo, who is in Kingston.
I don't know that name. No.
We're going to introduce you to a bunch of people.
Well, if you Ruth Wood is not an ordained clergy, but she's United Church clergy who was very helpful with a family situation when we knew someone who was transgender. And I will not add the ED on the end because it's not a verb. So I will say transgender. So the Observer at that time, before Broadview, had a wonderful article about Ruth Wood and her wife, and it's something I wish Pat could perhaps send you a link for. There was also an article about Ruth in the Toronto Star. So she has been out for some time, and she came out when she was in the process of being vetted for United Church clergy. So I hope you'll be able to meet her.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Yeah, there are several that are out and known in the United Church, and we're going to hook you up with some new friends, Theo.
Sounds good.
Great. Well, it's been a real pleasure to be with everybody tonight, and thank you for coming and spending time. And we've got more great issues coming up for you. And yes, there is going to be a summer reading club in July, and so I hope if you're available that you can make it. And we'll send out lots of notices for that in advance. But it's July, I think I'd already said July 5th at 7 p.m. So we'll see you then. Take care. Have a great night.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
That's good.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
A great event. Thank you.
Thanks, Dio.
Good night. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, Theo, for being so willing to share your story. We appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.